Okay, this video is chapter 25 from the book, The Medical Reformation, and we're going to be talking about sleep. One brief comment is one of the viewers, and I know this guy's a troll, he always says nasty things, but he's like, oh, you have no credibility because you dress like a monk, and nobody should watch anybody who dresses like a monk. And you know what? I like it. Martin Luther had a haircut in here. Not that I think Martin Luther's so great, but Martin Luther had a monk haircut on the cover here. And the reason I do it and continue to do it is because I think that the United States of America, having turned its back on Christianity and having secularized all the schools, has been a disaster. Because what regular people don't really understand, regular people just think, oh, everything just happens because that's the way it is. No. The powerful, rich people who run things, who determine how the school system works, who determine how the hospital system works, they hate the regular people. They consider them as useless eaters, scum. And what they want to do is rip them off. And actually, they prefer if they were gone sooner. So what I'm trying to say is the only way you can counteract that is with the idea of man is created in the image of God, therefore he's part divine, therefore he is above secular things. To do what is right by him is more important than money. And unless you go down that path, you can't have anything good. Believe me, I've been a doctor over 30 years. I come from a family of doctors. I know tons of doctors. We talk all the time. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been in the middle of the medical world. And I can assure you, high tech is simply used to rip off and exploit people. The way it is used, all these screening studies is just suck all the chumps in, take their money, and so what if they get hurt by it? Okay, that's how medicine works right now. It's basically, it hurts more people than it helps, and it can't be fixed unless you fix the morals and the ethics. And the same thing with the school system. Like we said, we've talked about this before. A little boy goes to school and somebody says, would you think it'd be fun to be a girl? He says, well, maybe. Yeah, castrate him. Okay, that's insane. It's beyond crazy. It's insane. It's not even just crazy. It's evil. Okay, and there's a lot of things like that happen in medicine. Giving somebody drugs don't work. And we talked about this. 99.9% of people with coronary artery disease go for cabbage, stents, and also pills that don't work. When you can cure the disease, almost always with just a low-fat vegan diet. Why wouldn't you do that? Why isn't that offered? Okay, so anyways, now we're going to talk about sleep. First of all, I started out with a little lullaby by John McCormick. He's the great Irish tenor. It's a beautiful song. You can click the YouTube video real easy. Sleep, my love, and peace attend thee all through the night. He's got the most pleasant voice, I think, of any opera singer who ever lived, John McCormick. Okay, in general, you want to try to sleep about 6 to 8 hours a night. Some people can get by close to 6. Some people really need the 8. You'll figure out for yourself what works best. A lot of times how you can figure out what you really need is by, how you sleep when you're out of a weekend. When you don't have any pressure to wake up early in the morning, how much sleep do you tend to get? That's probably the amount you need when you've got optimal conditions. Okay, I know for me, it's probably I need 7 hours, but sometimes I'm glad to get 8. If I only sleep 6, I'm not at my optimal performance. I know from lifting weights too. The more I sleep, the stronger I am when I get in the weight room and try to go for a new personal best record. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the brain here. The blue is the venous system. This is superior sagittal sinus, so it's right in the middle. And it's a big, giant vein that drains the blood vessels of the brain. Okay, the yellow stuff is the fluid around the brain. It's called cerebral spinal fluid because it's in communication and continuity between the skull around the brain and around the spinal cord. CSF, cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, so what's going to happen at night when you sleep, the neurons are going to pump out their waste products, and then the cerebral spinal fluid is allowed to rinse around the brain tissue to a much greater extent than it normally does, to rinse away the waste products. Okay, the CSF, cerebral spinal fluid, protects the brain a little bit like a shock absorber, kind of like a water helmet in American football, but it's also very important for removing waste products. Okay, here's a picture of the brain. And this is a coronal section, meaning, cutting it from front to back. That previous picture was down the middle from side to side, a sagittal cut. Okay, so the lymphatics do not run through the brain parenchyma itself, the brain tissue itself, where the neurons are, but they are located in the meninges. Those are the covering layers of the brain. So in the dura, the outer hard layer, dura means hard, mater means mother, hard mother, it's the hard layer around the outer surface of the brain. The dura attaches to the skull, so it's as far out as you can be and still be inside the skull. And you'll have lymphatics in there, which will drain away these waste products from the brain tissue. Okay. The superior sagittal sinus, the big midline vein, you'll have these little things called arachnoid villi. They also help to transfer some waste products from the brain into the venous system at that location. These lymphatics will then drain down to the neck lymph nodes, for example. This is the hippocampus and the medial temporal lobe, most important part of the brain for memory. Here's dura mater, part of the meningeal layer that wraps around all of this stuff. The gray matter ribbon is on the outer surface. It's called the cortex. Cortex means bark, like the bark of a tree. So if you look at a tree stump, that's been chopped down, you see around the periphery where the bark is. That's like where the gray matter is, where the neurons are. Their cell bodies, their nuclei are located there. Then you got some deep nuclei called the basal ganglia here. Most of the rest of the brain in these areas is all just connecting fibers, myelinated fibers, traveling to their different destinations. Okay. Most important cells in the brain are the neurons. Those are the ones that communicate the most with each other and send the messages. The neurons have support cells. The support cells are called glial cells. Glial means like glue. They hold the brain together. And there's about, depending on what you read, there's about 10 times as many glial cells as there are neurons. And in particular, a group of glial cells called astrocytes. And astro means shaped like a star. Cyte means cell. So astrocytes, they sort of get all the neurons and support them and get the neurons to do what they're supposed to do. The astrocytes are like mama. Okay, they feed the neuron, they clean up after the neuron, they take care of the neurons. That's sort of their job, supporting cells. This right here is an illustration of the glymphatic system. Glymphatic is combining two words. First part, gly, is from glial, the supporting cells of the brain. Then lymphatic, the second part of the word, glymphatic. So what happens at night is that the cerebrospinal fluid is able to rinse over the neurons in much greater quantities than it can during the daytime. And what this is all about is during the daytime, your neurons have to have very precise ionic gradients, a very precise external milieu environment so they can fire their action potentials correctly, so that you're intelligent and sharp and able to interact with the world effectively. At night, though, while you're asleep, that's the only time the neurons can go offline. They don't need to be firing action potentials. And this enables the space around the arteries as they penetrate the brain tissue, the brain parenchyma, that they can open up this space. This space is called the perivascular. Peri means around, vascular, around the artery. Perivascular space. And it's also named after Virchow Robin, the pathologist who sort of discovered the structure of it. So the perivascular space is a Virchow Robin. Open up at night while you're asleep and your neurons are offline, and they allow more cerebrospinal fluid to start rinsing over these neurons. The neurons, like Victorians, with their chamber pots, with their waste in there, they dump them out the window, so to speak, and that's like the neuron pumping them outside of themselves into what's called the extracellular matrix. And then the cerebrospinal fluid, this yellow color here, rinses over the neuron. The brown is the waste products, and it'll rinse them over to the perivascular space around the veins. And then it'll travel through the CSF and some through the veins and be thus removed from the brain parenchyma. Okay. The little green cell right here is an example of an astrocyte. So it's got multiple projections. That's why it's like a star, astro like a star. It's got foot plates on top of the vascular structures. It's got foot plates communicating with the region of the neurons. Okay, so that's the glymphatic system. And the fact that the brain cleans itself at night while you're asleep, that's why you're smartest first thing in the morning when you wake up, because all your neurons are clean. And you also get little hormonal effects, like a little boost of cortisol to maintain your blood glucose level, and a little ghrelin going to your hippocampus to stimulate it, to get you alert so you can go find food. An animal has to be smart when it's hungry so it can go find food. At night, you want to kind of take it easy the last couple hours. Avoid unnecessary stress so you can mellow out and produce more melatonin. Melatonin's made in the pineal gland of the brain. You want to avoid blue light. A lot of computers and cell phones give off blue light. Like if you have to buy an alarm clock, you want one with red light in your room, not blue light, because the blue light is like sky blue, and we're designed to be awake and alert when you got a lot of sky blue up there. We're designed to sleep at night. So you want to avoid that blue light in the evening. It's also good to have low watt bulbs, like 15-watt bulbs, and put those, in the spots where you actually have to go and have a light on at night. Ideally, it's good to have halogen lights. LED lights tend to be more blue, more bright. A halogen light is you can get them to be a little more reddish. The other thing too is you'll notice is that at night it's less annoying if the light comes from the ground. And I think that's because our ancestors would often be around a fire, and the body is not bothered too much when the light comes from the ground. On the other hand, you'll notice this at night, it's very unpleasant to have a light coming from above, because that mimics the sun, that mimics daytime, and that decreases your melatonin production in your pineal gland, which you need for sleeping. You can think of melatonin as being the opposite with cortisol. Cortisol is increased in the daytime to wake you up and get you to do stuff, increases glutamate transmission in the hippocampus and other parts of the brain. So it's like a stimulant a little bit. Melatonin's antioxidant, peaceful, go to sleep and rest, okay? So it takes a couple hours to ramp up your melatonin. So again, like I said, having a kind of quiet, easy night. Don't do stuff that stresses you out for no reason. Like don't watch the fake news on the TV, because that just can stress you out over nonsense and BS, and it's usually not even true, or their interpretation of it's not even true. So why annoy yourself with that? In a casino like in Las Vegas, they keep all the bright lights on because they want your brain to think it's daytime. So you stay up later while you're tired. You're more likely to be a chump and lose your money gambling. Avoid computers real late at night if you can. Sometimes you can't because you got to get work done. But if you can, don't be looking at your phone. And I recommend having zero electronics in the bedroom. I actually have a no EMF bed with a Faraday cage. And I got a EMF meter that says zero EMF inside there, a tri-field EMF meter. Don't have your phone close to you when you're sleeping. A lot of kids will do that. They'll sleep with the phone right next to them so they can quickly answer their text messages. As if that was like the most important thing in the world, getting back quickly to their peers. Cell phones, especially lower IQ, especially in kids. Avoid stressful stuff at night. We talked about that. Start winding down your day a couple hours before bedtime. Excuse me. Talked about halogen bulbs. As far as like temperature, I used to think it was better to have it cool at night, but I'm a little older now. I'm 60 years old, okay? So, 60-year-old, it's like kind of having a wife in charge of your voiding, okay? It's like you got to ask your prostate permission. Can I void now? And then your prostate says, let me think about it. Okay. So there's a little bit of a lag time, and the prostate pushes on the bladder a little bit. And so you don't have the same tolerance. When I was a young guy, you could eat a whole big giant dinner, go to sleep, wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and not have once woken up to void. When you're older, you're probably going to wake up at least once a night to void. And what I've noticed is, so when I was younger, I might have liked the room colder, but I now notice that I like the room warmer because maybe I'll sweat a little bit, which I don't mind, and I wake up less to void. Now, I do know in nature it gets a little cooler at night, and I think it is natural to sleep a little cooler at night, but I find I like it warmer. I've just tested it, and that's the case. But I got some fat meat eaters in my family, and they like the house colder. So I'll often lose those discussions. But for what it's worth, I think that's a good trick to know. I've seen that make a significant difference. Another reason why I sometimes like the furnace on is it helps me not hear other family members talking or playing music or watching TV or the dog barking or something. At night, I try to avoid wet foods. When I say a wet food, something like oatmeal, because it's wet and it's not that tightly bound to the food, so you're going to have to wake up the void more if you're eating something like oatmeal. I like to keep the room as dark as possible, just enough light in there, which I get from the alarm clock, the red light, that I can see the wall so I don't bump into it. I like to walk around in the dark. I don't ever put a light on at night. That would mess up your melatonin, And also, I don't like anybody moving the furniture in the room because I'm going to be walking around in the dark. If somebody moved the furniture in the room and I don't know about it, that's not good. It's like a Helen Keller joke. Okay. Just the red light on an alarm clock is plenty to keep the room bright enough. You can even turn the clock to face the wall if you want to make it a little darker. Caffeine is to be avoided. I recommend completely avoiding caffeine, having zero caffeine. It increases the same hormones as psychological stress, the cortisol and the catecholamines. Those perk you up. They wake you up. I mean, that's why you might drink coffee or something if you're excessively sleepy and you got to drive somewhere, okay? But as a routine habit, bad idea. And I'll see sometimes a so-called sleep expert or somebody who claims to be a dementia expert, and they'll say it's okay to drink up to 3 cups of coffee. And that's nonsense. That's stupid. Okay, it sticks around. It has about a half-life of about 8 hours. Some people it's more towards 6 hours the half-life, but still, there's going to be some on board at night, and that's going to decrease how well you sleep. And even if you sleep through the night, you're not going to sleep as deeply. It's a bad idea. And even decaf still has caffeine, not as much as regular coffee, but it still has caffeine. It's best not to drink any. Also, once you drink it habitually, you have to have it at the same time you get a withdrawal headache because it's also a vasoconstrictor. Caffeine is bad in 2 reasons. Number one, it's increasing activation of your brain with increased glutamate transmission. It's also causing vasoconstriction of the blood supply to your frontal lobes because it stresses for acute emergency situations, fight, flight, or freeze. And you don't need a lot of frontal lobe activity for that. So what happens though, it makes you a little stupider. If you're, it's better than being asleep if you have to do something cognitive, but ideally you want to be well rested, no caffeine on board. Okay. Also, I'll tell you something you're going to hear. You're going to hear some people, even some pretty good nutrition experts, say things like protein perks, like perks you up, and they're going to say that carbohydrates calm you down. Now, carbohydrates are a little more complicated because there's really like 3 carbohydrates. They're simple sugars, and simple sugars, they say, will lead to increased production of tryptophan to serotonin, and that will make you sleepy. And they'll say complex carbohydrates are okay because it's a much more gradual process of the glucose being absorbed from the gut into the blood because all the fiber has to be peeled off and separated from it by the enzymes in the intestinal tract. Okay, and I think complex carbohydrates are the best thing to eat. Complex carbohydrates are also called starch. Fiber, some of it gets converted to short-chain fatty acids, and so that'll slowly have an effect of sending energy into the body. What these people are going to tell you is the protein, they think, perks you up more. And then why is that? There's a lady by the name of Catherine Reed. She just did an interview with Chef AJ where she was talking about MSG. She's the lady who wrote that book, Fat, Sick, and Stressed. And she claims, she talks all about how the main source of glutamate in the diet nowadays is manufactured free glutamate. You can just take any protein, especially one that's high in glutamate intrinsically, like gluten, like casein, like whey, and process it, which basically means chop up the protein into its individual constituent amino acids. And then when somebody eats that, they'll get a bit of a bolus of glutamate into their body. The enterocytes, the gut lining cells, can sequester that glutamate to some extent, but you can overwhelm that sequestering and get increased glutamate in the blood. And you can have problems with your gut, leaky gut and other problems with it that might make it less able to control the glutamate that you eat. And what she said, though, what I thought was interesting, she said is if you eat a real high protein meal, you're going to get increased glutamate into your blood, okay? So what I'm getting at, you see the connection there? They'll tell you some of these articles, and again, I don't know for sure if this is accurate or not. I'm just letting you know what's out there psychologically so you can think your way through it. But some of these articles will say, if you look up, does protein perk you up? Does protein increase alertness? What they're going to say is that, well, the protein seems to increase tyrosine. Tyrosine, the amino acid, leads to increased production of norepinephrine and dopamine in your brain, and that makes you a little more alert. Now, I don't know for sure if that's even true, okay? But I'm just telling you that's what's out there. But what I'm saying is, if you go down the path of what this lady's saying, Catherine Reed, she's a PhD biochemist specializing in protein biochemistry, and she claims that eating a high-protein meal puts more glutamate into your blood. What is she saying? Think about it. What she's basically saying is that the high-protein meal has a little bit of effect of a stimulant. Glutamate's a stimulant, okay? About 90% of the neurotransmitters in your brain are glutamate, and it's an excitatory transmitter, meaning that it activates the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, so here's what I think is a little interesting, perhaps a little funny. If that is correct, and she's probably right, she's a pretty smart lady, and she specializes in protein biochemistry. Okay, so now think about it. how meat, what I'm here trying to say is that meat has a little bit of an effect like caffeine. Okay, and let me explain. You're getting a mild stimulant effect from the increased glutamate coming in, according to what Catherine Reed is saying. And then secondarily, you're eating the fat. The meat almost always is fat. Like a typical meatless salmon, 50% fat, 50% protein. There's no carbohydrates in meat or animal foods other than milk's got the lactose. All right, so you see what I'm saying? What a double screw job that is, the double F job, okay? The fat's going to decrease oxygenation in your tissues at the same time while the glutamate, little boost is going to ramp up metabolic activity in the brain, not to mention the inflammation caused by the meat. So you're going to get what you don't want, the exact thing you don't want. A little bit of increased metabolic rate simultaneously coupled with decreased oxygen and glucose delivery. That's bad. Okay? So think about it. If you think about a meal where you eat a high-fat meal, so the high fat's going to drop oxygen delivery to your brain. You're going to put salt on it. Meat often has to be flavored with salt. It's kind of disgusting. Like I said, if you're walking down a path in a forest or a jungle and you see a dead deer at the side of the path, you go, do you want to get down on your knees and take a bite out of it? No, you don't, because your teeth can't even pierce it, okay? You see the flies buzzing around the carcass. It's disgusting. But if you had your cat with you, your cat would run and be all over it, okay? Because they're a true carnivore. You're not. If we put a bowl of fruit on the table, you would salivate. You're made for that. All right, but you see where I'm going with this. You're ramping up the screw jobs on your brain neurons. Your neurons have to be coupled between their metabolic rate and the oxygen and glucose delivery. That's NVU, neurovascular coupling. If you increase the metabolic rate, you better increase your oxygen and glucose delivery, or you run the risk these neurons are going to go into apoptosis. A small difference, they can probably compensate and wait it out, okay? But the bigger that gap, the more of a problem. So you see where this is going. If you vasoconstrict, you're going to be dropping your oxygen and glucose delivery. You vasoconstrict from sodium, salt. You vasoconstrict from caffeine. Okay, you're dropping that oxygen and glucose delivery. You get less oxygen and glucose delivery from having high dietary fats because it's sticking the red blood cells together. You can't deliver the oxygen as well with rouleau formation and blood sludge. Chronically, from a high-fat diet, you're getting diabetes, causing microvascular problems to the endothelial cells. Endotheliitis, it's called. Microvasculopathy, it's called. Either way, it's going to drop oxygen and glucose delivery. With hypertension on a chronic basis, you're going to get atherosclerosis as well as injury to the small vessel walls. You're going to get thickening of the capillary basement membrane. You're going to get thickening of the vascular smooth muscles. You're going to decrease oxygen and glucose delivery. And then you're ramping up this metabolic rate due to sleep deprivation from the insomnia, from caffeine, sleep deprivation from being stressed out, just the same effect from the stress itself. Then you're ingesting caffeine, or worse, you're smoking a cigarette, or you're taking other stimulants in, like aspartame, the sweetener, okay, like glyphosate, that also activates the NMDA receptor. Using your cell phone, letting more calcium in, it opens up voltage-gated calcium channels. You see how it's so easy to make yourself stupid, and most people do? Most 60-year-olds are cognitively slow, 60 and older, okay? I see lots of people in their 50s that already are kind of becoming cognitively slow. Anyways, what I'm just saying is, I think that's funny. Why do I think this is funny? Because there's all kinds of people, you'll see them all over the internet praising meat and high protein as being good for the brain, improving cognitive function and alertness. And I'm like, yeah, right, you dummies. You haven't thought it through. You might get a short, transient little boost. You're not as sleepy as if you drink like sugar water, so to speak. But if you have a little fiber in there, you slow it down, you're better off. Plus, in the short term, I'll also tell you a little secret I discovered. Sometimes I'm a little tired. And I would never drink coffee anymore because I know if I drink coffee, I won't be able to sleep that night. Plus, I don't want the effect of coffee. But what I found I could do is I can just guzzle 32 ounces of beet juice, maybe chase it down with about 10 ounces of water or something. And I'll be awake. But the great thing about that, using that as a way to perk yourself up, and maybe it perks you up because it gives you a little buzz of the glucose in your blood, maybe because the nitrates are vasodilators, maybe it's because you just added like over 40 cc's of volume to yourself, that perks you up. Maybe it's because the transient effect of the 40 cc's of volume, it's a little cold, you probably drop your body temperature a tiny little bit, and then you have to compensate to work it back up. I don't know, but I know it works because I sometimes have to do tons of work. I'll have to read tons and tons of cases, okay, generate, because that's kind of what medicine's all about, generating billing codes to make money. So that's what conventional medicine's all about. So if I have a ton of work, and I know I'm not going home till that work is done. If I go slow, I'll go home 3 hours late. I don't want that. I want to go home on time. So I have to be able to do something to be able to stay alert and awake and crank, 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 crank. And I know from experience, goes down 32 ounces of beet juice, chase it down with 10. I've done this tons and tons of times. I also find that very helpful when I give a lecture. I find the words more quickly. You see me sometimes giving these lectures at night. I'm tired. I just worked, a 10-hour, 11-hour day, and I just want to kind of get it done. No rehearsal. Everything's a first draft. So, but then if you see me like when I'm giving a lecture at Chef AJ, I'm usually trying to be more with it and alert and have my act together a little better, okay? Because, that's like a bigger audience, for my own personal videos at this site, I get about 300 views typically, and the people kind of know me, so they'll give me the benefit of the doubt if I'm a little slow or awkward compared to usual. But anyways, that's a good trick to know. You get the benefit of keeping you perked up and awake for about 5 hours, but then you don't get the effect of interfering with sleep at night. So I've just found that works. I've done that a bunch of times. Okay. Continuing with this talk about sleep. Coffee has a half-life of 6 to 8 hours. If you have to drink coffee, I would get like an organic brand that's going to be less sprayed with herbicides and pesticides. The less ingredients on something, the better. The less they can hide other stuff into it. I actually would currently, I won't eat anything if there's more than one ingredient in it because they can put who knows what into the second ingredient. And I quit drinking coffee years ago. I did drink it before then for about 15 years in a row. And then finally I quit it. And I used to hate the fact, like, let's say I would have to do a biopsy, and then I would be getting a withdrawal headache if I didn't get my cup of coffee. So I would sometimes, say, oh, wait, let me go get my cup of coffee. So I hated that. I could be delaying the biopsy. Not cool. But I needed that cup of coffee or I wouldn't be able to function optimally. Caffeine does cause insomnia, less sleeping, not as deep. You can get a vicious cycle of caffeine, insomnia, tired the next day, have some more caffeine to sort of try to chase it away. Caffeine increases glutamate transmission, like psychological stress. It increases blood pressure. It increases blood lipids. It causes vasoconstriction of the frontal lobe. It increases cholesterol levels. It's all bad. Anybody telling you caffeine is good, you got to remember any billion-dollar processed food is going to have a bodyguard of lies around it of fake, bogus, industry-funded studies. This is a good book, Caffeine Blues, and by this guy Stephen Chiniski. And he kind of summarizes a whole bunch of studies about all the problems related to caffeine. And it's kind of funny, when I talked about this book, I get like these negative posts. Like if you post anything negative about a real popular commercial food like soy or, for example, caffeine, MSG or something, all of a sudden these trolls pop out of the woodwork and they say, oh, studies show that caffeine is good for you, soy is good for you, MSG it doesn't cause any negative effects. It's all BS, okay? You'll learn the pattern. There's a lot of trolls publishing at these nutrition sites because they're defending their product. They're paid to do that. That'd be kind of a fun, easy job. I wouldn't do it for ethical reasons, but I mean, think about how easy that is. Just go on your computer, cut and paste some stupid BS to defend some commercial product. That's why people do it. That's one thing that kind of made me sad. It made me sad when I look at the internet and I see most of the so-called health and nutrition experts are just liars. They're lying to promote something. They're lying to sell something. Sometimes it's just because they're ignorant, but most of the time they're lying because they get something out of it. Okay. Okay, how do you quit a cup of coffee? Just drop it by 25% the next day, 50% the day after that, 25% that lacks the day before the last, and then you stop that day. And just quit one cup at a time. When I quit the cup, I felt sad for a couple of days. I had cravings for a couple of weeks, but then after that, I was so glad to be done with it. My energy came back, and I actually have more energy throughout the day. I used to have that coffee, quick little buzz in the morning, and then would have the afternoon, rebound from it. Avoid MSG. MSG causes headaches in some people, insomnia in other people, so it could have a negative effect on your sleep. And watch out because any processed food is probably going to have, not even, forget about MSG, just MFG. MF, the F stands for free glutamate. Again, just from processing the protein, cutting it up into small bits, then you free up individual glutamate residues. And so I had a lecture on that previously before on MSG and all that. That ladies lecture, you can just go to Chef AJ's. I forget what it's called, but it was just recently from this past week. Catherine Reed talking about she cured her daughter of autism by removing MSG from the child's diet. And I do think the kid really had autism. I saw videos of the kid. Plus, I think she's for real. I mean, she's a pretty smart lady. I read her book. It was good. I read a bunch of blogs at her YouTube, at her website and stuff. She's smart. Go through your pantry and your fridge, throw out anything with MSG, which basically means almost all your processed food. For example, if I eat oatmeal, I'll only eat single ingredient plain oatmeal that's organic. I would never eat the other ones with more ingredients in there because they're almost all going to have MSG and other stuff. And I wouldn't eat the non-organic because they can spray glyphosate on it, which they often do. No electrons in the bedroom. The bedroom should only be for sleep and for sex. No TV, no radio, no cell phones. Your body should just sort of be programmed. You walk in that room, it's time to either make the two-back beast or to go to sleep. Okay. And, you know, sex helps a man to sleep. So it also lowers his risk of prostate cancer. So I told my wife, you know, look, if you don't, you know, satisfy me, I won't, I'm going to get prostate cancer and I won't be able to sleep. She didn't seem to care. She wasn't convinced at all by that. Why is sleep so important? We talked about it. Your brain cleans itself, clears out the waste products. We talked about all that. Oh, teenagers. Teenagers often have their clock set a little bit different. It's harder for them to get up so early. I think, you know, that they need to get their sleep. So, like, if you got a teenager, let them sleep on the weekends. They especially need that, and try to get them to go to bed earlier, even though that's not so easy to do, because they can accumulate a lot of sleep debt. I remember when I was in college, and there was an 8 o'clock class that was required. Well, it was kind of required. And I remember being quite upset about that. I thought, how ridiculous and insane is it to have a class so early in the morning at 8 a.m.? Now that I'm old, I like getting up early just because I get more of that morning good time. So the key is getting to bed earlier. That'll get it. And if I let myself sleep on the weekends if I need to catch up. All right, so that's pretty much it for sleep. I hope that was helpful. That's it.